For coming tonight. This is a program that I've been wanting to do for a number of years, primarily because I had never seen a presentation by a CEO to a venture capitalist until I had to do it myself. And probably after 45 or 50 times, I think I sort of figured it out. But we thought that it might be appropriate for you guys to see what it's really like to present to a VC. The presentation you'll see is from 2007, when Accuray was raising its Series B fund. And the venture capitalists and investors that you see up here are the individuals that were looking to invest in that fund. The CEO, Jen Baird, will be presenting. And it's going to be very much like a live presentation, so I'm not going to do any introductions other than to invite Jen up. But before I do that, I would like to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors are Ann Arbor Spark, Mish Bio, and Brinkshofer, and we hope that all of you will endeavor to work with them. We will do this in somewhat of an unusual manner because we'd like for it to be quite interactive. And I'm sure that as you hear Jen making a particular statement, you'll wonder, why did she do that at that time? Or you'll hear one of the investors ask Jen a question, and you'll say, why did he ask that question? So what we want you to do is to raise your hand when that happens and ask the question. And that will make this a lot more interesting than just sitting here watching Jen give a talk and a bunch of investors sit there and listen. So we're hoping this will be quite interactive. The session is being videotaped, and so we'll ask that when you raise your hand, I'll alert that there's a question, and either Heather or Mary Cat will come out with a microphone, hand you a microphone, so that the people that are viewing this will be able to hear the question. Okay, with that, I don't think anything else. Jen?
Hi there. I'm Jen. This is my card.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Thank you, Walt. And let's see, we got Pete. Oh, there we go. We've got Tim. So before we get started, since I've just met all of you, can you just tell me a little bit about your background, where you come from, what your fund is interested in?
Well, I represent a bunch of individual angels, mostly passive, that invest in early stage startups.
What's your background?
Oh, I'm a humble manager, CEO, a former CEO.
Business side or technical? Do you have engineering degrees? What's in the...
All on the business side, generalist,
Okay.
troublemaker, troubleshooter, turnaround artist.
Excellent.
So I'm one of the managing directors of Arboretum Ventures. We've got, this is 2007?
Yes.
Ooh, we've got about $100 million under management in 2 funds, and my background is I'm one of the rare venture capitalists these days in healthcare that's a generalist, and that I'm a business person, economist by training, and I guess that's about it.
Which fund are you in?
This is you mean which fund are we investing out of now?
Yes.
And it's out of Arboretum 2, our $73 million second fund.
Okay.
Jen, I'm Pete Shigori. I'm with Baird Venture Partners in Chicago, and we're a dual sector fund, both IT.
We're not related, are we?
You know, it's kind of coincidental that our firm has your name, but I don't think we are related.
I don't think we are either, but I've heard of
probably
you before.
I should probably check with my
out
CEO
that.
though, just to make sure, right? So we're a dual sector fund in IT and life sciences, and within life sciences, we invest in medical devices and research tools like Accuray, and also technology-enabled healthcare services. And we really like capital-efficient opportunities. Those are very important to us. We're currently investing out of a $70 million Fund 2.
Okay.
And that's about halfway spent. And we invest all over the country. But we really like, I'd say, half our capital is on the coasts and half of it is in companies that we find. Oh, there's a question. Is this the first freeze?
Question?
Yeah, I'm waiting for my phone.
So my question is, how much have you sent them in advance, and how much do they know about the story before you get started?
Probably at this point, I have sent them the presentation. There's a decent chance we're having this conversation over the phone and not in person, because usually the first conversation doesn't happen in person. And they've probably had an introduction somewhere along the line. Like, the reality in this situation is I had pitched Tim before, a couple years back. I had, Pete had gotten a referral from somebody else, and Walt didn't know anything when I first met him, except I think Ian might have told you a little bit about what we were doing, but not even that.
But in 2007, I've been involved for 3 years.
Microphone.
Well, I'll let Pete finish. But yeah, the reality of this in 2007, you'd probably pitched us a couple of times.
Maybe.
So, we do healthcare also, but we hadn't done a lot outside sort of the clinical realm, as I would say. And so, although we knew and had a lot of respect for Jen and Colin and knew the company, our interest was investing a little bit further down the path than maybe we would have gotten done originally.
You have another question?
Just sort of a step back. So this is Series B that you're talking about now, but how was the initial introduction made? How did you first become aware of Acuri? Was it through a third party that said, you've got to check these people out, they're really cool, or did Jen approach you in some way?
I had a former investor in my fund, in my old fund, the fund that I had previously worked at, called me up. We had maintained a relationship. He's an angel in the Ann Arbor community, and he said, you really ought to take a look at Acuri cytometers. And a lot of times, that warm introduction coming from somebody else is really the foot in the door, because we're looking at literally hundreds of plans. And so, this was a respected investor. In fact, he was an investor in the company. And he said, we like what they're doing, and you really ought to take a look. And it's right in a space that we proactively look for, right? They're called research tools, the picks and shovels of drug discovery. It fell into that category. So it was really on this investor's request that we took a look at it.
Yep.
Yeah, and we met before you had even moved back to Ann Arbor. I think you met both myself and my wife when you were networking, and then you worked at ISIS for a few years, and we met you and Colin there. So we had a personal and professional relationship that went back, by that point, probably 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember talking to you about starting the company and some of the things. So unlike Pete, although it was on the sort of edge of our investment space, not quite to the center of our knowledge, we had sort of a different relationship. And not to spoil the whole story, but that's how it worked kind of well. I think we had a lot of relationships with the people, and Baird had a lot of domain expertise that helped a lot.
And I'm sorry, once again, the oddball. I met Jen in 2004. I think the same individual introduced me as an angel investor, and so I was an investor from late 2004. Even though we're talking 2007. Now, I'm supposed to be here in 2007 as an investor, right, which I was, but I was also an insider. So I was on both sides of it in spring 2007. We also pitched in 2007 to other VCs, not just these two lucky individuals and firms.
Hundreds.
But there were other people at 2007 as well.
That's right. Yeah.
If there's some time afterwards, I have some follow-ups to that, but I don't want to derail this.
So we want to stay enrolled 2007. She's pitching all three of us as investors. I was sort of an insider.
Yeah.
They were new outsiders.
And I don't think actually this situation ever quite occurred, in that I had conversations with each one, but I never pitched all three of them together. But that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Tim, I wanted to ask, you've pointed out this Acuri was on the edge, arguably outside of the space that you and Jan were looking at when you created the fund. And you had certainly looked at Acuri more than once. You knew Jen from before she started the company through its, this was the beginning of this third year of the company at this point. So what got you to the table again and got you over the hump?
Yeah.
I'll answer that.
Yeah, Walt threatened my life.
You take the first shot.
Well, I don't want to spoil the whole story, but that's a great question. And David, it's funny you answered, because David basically became our tutor at Arboretum on flow cytometry. So he spent probably a week trying to explain the red laser warble and some of the things that were going on. But the short answer is that because of other spaces we might have said had more instinct towards in terms of product development and things, I think the response was usually there were a couple of issues. One, sort of come back to me with hard data that shows that it really works, because instinctively I just can't tell based on what you're telling me. And two, there's an issue relating to the cost of goods because I was always sort of a believer when she gets into it that dogs sort of would eat the dog food, that if you could do what you said you guys were trying to do, there would be interest. And so demonstrate to me with objective data and you basically did. I mean, it was a little messier than that, but you had made a lot of progress on those two objectives.
And Tim, I always thought it was that my fellow board member and investor in Arboretum dragged you in kicking and screaming. But all of us.
We had to say, well, and actually there's some interesting issues there in that we are an Ann Arbor fund, right? And Jen had done a terrific job raising all this angel money, and there were people in the community, including a few in our funds, that were in, right? So when some of the hard things to do in the negotiation had to occur, I'd sort of blame Pete. And, and in fact, not to belabor this, but this was February of 2007, because I was skiing with my family in Montana, and he called and said, and we were I think we were the second pretty girl, right, at the dance. The prom was approaching.
I think you were the third or the fourth.
Yeah. And so,
we won't
Pete,
go there.
Pete was moving down his list, and, finally he got going. I guess you're going from Z to A. Yeah. He was going to Z to A to find another fund to invest with them, and he finally got to us. And, once I heard the progress that the company had made, which I was sort of familiar with, but they could sort of validate, and they had done a lot of diligence, then we moved pretty quickly after that, because we knew the people already. We knew you guys, and once the data was clear and once we had sort of a co-investor that was sort of filling a gap that we felt was missing with our fund, we moved fairly fast.
But we all had a personal nudge from somebody we respected to first listen.
That's pretty typical. So I will launch into Accuracy Cytometer's current status. So where we are at right now in 2007, the company started in 2005. And we now have great validation. We have a Vortex survey of 4,000 researchers, several other surveys. Our product is basically ready to go to market. We think we're going to be launching later this year. So we're in beta testing at this point, and we're getting ready to launch. We did show our product for the first time in the last couple of months at the cell biology meeting. And absolutely. Okay. Oh, sure. Hang on. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how did those beta tests go, Jen?
They went really well, but not quite as well as we would have liked, and we've got to do a little bit of improvement. But we're right now about 13 people, and we have outsourced much of our development to 30 contract specialists. So do you guys know anything about flow cytometry? Have you ever heard of flow cytometry before? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about it. Flow cytometer is a scientific instrument that provides cell-by-cell analysis on multiple parameters in seconds for thousands of cells. Essentially, we take a bunch of cells in the liquid, typically blood cells, and we hydrodynamically focus them and bring them out like a string of pearls in front of a laser and a whole bunch of detectors. And by doing that, we can actually detect a whole bunch of parameters around that. And on the picture there, you have a couple of the market leaders. So the BD Fax Caliber and the FC500 are from Beckman Coulter and Beckman Dickinson, as well as the low-end provider, which is Guava. And then there's our beta instrument there. And we have a marketplace that's over $1 billion a year. Yes, Tim?
So yours looks a lot like Guava. Why? Somebody's tried this before, Jen. Why would I invest in Guava? How are they doing?
Well, Guava is actually a green laser instrument, which means that everybody who uses it has to change all their reagents and protocols. And ours is actually compatible with the industry standard, so we aren't asking our customers to actually make any changes like that. And they actually are priced significantly higher than our target price point. So our target market is life science research tools. You might think that this is primarily an in vitro diagnostic tool, but actually only 30% of the market is in vitro diagnostics. The oligarchy at the top are BD and BC, and the reason the customers and researchers who use this tool aren't investing in it is because of cost, and cost, really. It's because the capital equipment costs, the operating costs, they have to hire a dedicated technician, and the size of the footprint takes up a lot of their space. And our solution to that is an affordable, easy-to-use, compact instrument, and we're going to be able to deliver a $30,000 full-featured flow cytometer, which we plan to launch later this year.
Hey, Jen.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of tools that researchers can use.
Uh-huh.
There are really interesting genomic platforms. There's protein-based platforms. There's cellular analysis. Why should, I mean, this is one solution out of many. What's the trend in cellular analysis compared to other types of tools that are being used?
Fabulous question, Pete. You led right into my next slide. Very handy of you. So this is comparing flow cytometers to other major cell analysis tools. So microscopes, conventional PCR, and plate readers are the way that cell analysis is typically done in a life science research lab. And what we're doing with the flow cytometer is giving a lot more capability. And the biggest barrier to having a ubiquitous life science tool in these spaces. So microscopes, PCRs, and plate readers are all over in every individual lab. Flow cytometers are not. They're primarily in core facilities, and that's a cost issue because scientists love the power and capability of flow cytometers, but they can't own it. So the reason they would do this is because of all those little features, the cell-by-cell analysis, the ability to access large numbers of cells, gives them a lot more capability and research power. And they would have them. And by the way, this is kind of like having a toolbox. So I can have my wrench and my hammer and my screwdriver, and all of them are really helpful. And it's not that I would not use a wrench to do a screwdriver's job. Flow cytometers add capability, but individual labs can't afford them.
But Jen, it looks like there's plenty of flow cytometers out there, and they're run really in core labs. Why are these core labs going to want to buy this cheap flow cytometer?
You guys are doing great at anticipating my next slide. And I don't think you saw them in advance either. So why would they do that? This is our great survey that we did of 4,000 life science researchers. And the reaction people get when we talk about our product concept is, wow, when can I get one? 86% of the researchers we surveyed want one in their lab. Only 24% have one. That gap is pent-up demand for our product.
Yeah, but they don't have the approval to buy them.
They can buy ours. It's below their purchasing threshold.
They got to use their core lab.
They don't have to use their core lab. They have to buy a $150,000 instrument in their core lab. But down at the $30,000 price point, they can actually afford to have ours in their lab.
They aren't going to get resistance within their organization?
Not typically until $50,000.
So this is kind of like the PC to the mainframe.
That's a very good analogy.
Okay.
So we are actually trying to make personal flow cytometry out of a mainframe organization. That's your answer? They both like this IT thing.
So tell us about the recurring revenue stream off this box.
Let me see where. Oh, gosh. Look at that next slide. So this is our product line. And, they don't actually have these slides in front of them, so they're doing really well. This is our product line. So it consists of an instrument, a computer, and some recurring revenue in optical filters, particle filters, reagent kits, operating fluids, and service contracts. So we do have a recurring revenue stream, but it's primarily a CapEx instrument.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not. Somebody should ask a question about that.
This is
revisionist history.
No, it's not. This is the biggest problem we had.
But Jen, isn't all the money in the reagents?
According to Pete, it is.
Where's the juice?
There is not primarily juice, and here's why. The reason we think that we don't want to pursue a razor blade strategy is because we will take years and years, and our Chief Commercial Officer, Jack Balls, had experience in the reagent business and knows just how difficult it is to grow those businesses. Right, Jack? Not Jack. And as we go through this process, we actually think that this is an opportunity to get a platform out and to greatly expand the market. We're putting this down at a price point where people can afford to buy it, and then we actually have partnerships that we're building with the reagent carriers. But that reagent income stream will come on later.
So you're going to take all this time and sell work with some researcher that's going to want to field test this thing, and you're going to sell them one $25,000 instrument, and then 5 years later they're going to come buy another one from you? How can you afford to do that?
Well, we've got a very capital-efficient sales process that allows us to get a lot of instruments out and through referrals. And we actually do have some recurring revenue, but it won't become a huge portion, and we'll sell a lot more instruments first. And we actually think this will give us a great platform for exit. The reason it's a great platform for exit because there are a number of reagent companies that are actually in active conversations with us right now to figure out ways to either OEM these instruments from us or get their reagent juice on our platform. And we think we can get a piece of that revenue.
Boy, my partnership is going to have a really hard time with this. That is really difficult to think that you're going to just sell a box. This is a capital equipment play.
It is a capital equipment play.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Question?
That is tough.
Pete, why is it tough to sell this to your partnership? Do they only invest in reagent companies?
No, but gosh, I think the razor blade model is something that a lot of investors look for, right? It's there's the box and then there's the recurring revenue off the box, and that's what creates the high margin. If you're looking for a 70-80% gross margin business, you're going to get that from a capital equipment play. And are we going to be in the business of selling boxes every 5 years, like Tim said, to one researcher? That seems like a really tough proposition.
So jumping forward, how did you sell your partners on this deal?
So jumping forward, I think we rationalize this as disposable capital equipment.
The big pen, huh?
Right?
The big pen of disruption.
Yeah, I'm glad you never gave me that phrase before I came. I would have said no.
How did you do it, Tim?
Well, I wasn't as smart as... No, well, I probably should let you finish the presentation because I don't want to, jump.
Yeah, what's the next page here? We got to move her along.
Okay.
Well,
I think how do we resolve it? I think the feature set of, producing an instrument like this, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about the price in a few minutes, but, at that price point, it convinced us that it could ramp rapidly if you could achieve in a year what you thought you were going to achieve technically, that, it was a game-changing instrument in the price performance aspects of the instrument outweigh the negative issues relating to the business model.
So I want to jump in with Jen and make the argument.
You aren't allowed, David.
I know.
Can't make the case.
One of the things that we ran into all the way along was you can't win on a price play. And it's great to put this slide up next. It's all flowing so well. Did you guys have concerns about that? That, hey, what you're doing is making something that somebody else makes, only you're making it cheaper, and you can't win that way?
Well, I thought it would be attractive to the customers if it worked and you're going to sell a, Lexus for a Toyota price. People will buy it, right? So the question is, can you make any money at it on a margin basis?
70%.
And, well, that's what you were telling us now. But
That's what I'm telling you.
And the other interest, yeah, we'll get to what the COGS were, because I have the old business plans. Which, an interesting thing when you pitch, you go back and we keep it all. Storage is cheap on a computer these days, right? So on the server, we pulled up the old plan, and we'd look and we'd compare and contrast about what she was telling us now. Now, to the company's credit, it was hitting a lot of timelines, relatively speaking, in our world, right? No one matches them exactly right. But, not to steal the thunder, but there was a lot more upside in the price than you guys thought at the time, right?
Sure.
So that's what we're going to find out here in a few minutes.
I just have a quick question. So when you talk about upside in the price, you're talking about a disposable capital component, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm assuming that if you're looking at upside in the price, you're taking into consideration your service contracts, your licensing agreements with other reagent companies. I don't understand how you would be able to sell to a customer a capital equipment that is going to expire and have to renew in 5 years' time.
Well,
You have to remember
it's a struggle.
the cost differential between this instrument and I mean, they were planning on going to market at like a quarter the price, right? So it's a Lexus for a Yugo price. I mean,
So if I
there's a
talk
huge
about this-
differential.
Yeah,
If
it
I
was
talk
a 4
about
to
this
5
slide-
times.
What's the BD market leading instrument?
125,000.
So
BD
25
Excalibur.
versus 125. What about 40 versus 125? Right.
That's true, but you're talking about the difference between a Lexus and a Yugo.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
That's
No,
the
no,
kicker.
no.
But that's how you're
Hold on.
equating
In
it.
2007,
Not performance-wise.
my memory in 2007, although the price was 1/5, the big risk was, does it work, and can it change the use habits of the user? And the second one was the research showed, but it hadn't been shown yet. So, well, to me, the price and the COGS were less of a risk than one. Does it work in 2007? Because the beta test had some hiccups, and two,
Well, not to get into the math,
use.
but I remember it quite well. In 2005, it was we're going to have a cost of goods of $8,500, and they had kind of worked it through, and they were running at about 15, 17,000. So
True.
at 25 grand, you
2005,
weren't
that
making
was
any
the
money,
truth.
but at 35 to 40 grand, you might make some money.
Okay,
so
we've
we
just
were at
demonstrated
35.
different investor sets look at different things.
Yeah.
So from a customer
So not
experience
to blow the
standpoint,
whole story, but there was a lot of feedback, not only in these presentations at this time, but soon thereafter when we were on the board, trying to more than inch the price up.
Well, there's even a discrepancy in this pitch.
Yeah.
I just showed it, actually.
On the next page, moving right along, Jen.
Moving right along, if you look at this slide, I want to talk about how do we fit into the competitive marketplace. So on the y-axis is our capability, and on the x-axis is price points. And so all of the products that are currently in the market of any significance are on this map. And isn't it handy how the business school professors would be so proud they all fell on a nice little price performance curve line. I did not make that up. That is truly the way they were. And the absolute gold standard for a flow cytometer analyzer at this point was the BD Excalibur, and that's where we took our specs from. So our specifications for what we want this instrument to be is the same as the gold standard BD Excalibur, and we want to provide the same capability at a fraction of the cost. So this is your mainframe to PC play where you've got great computing capability at a fraction of the cost that's accessible, and people can move that out much more broadly. And so that's the logic behind, and so that makes us a hugely disruptive factor in the marketplace.
If you looked at the competitor that was out there at the time, there was another company that actually tried to do this called Guava. I think we mentioned it. Guava was a low-cost flow cytometer, although when it got into the market, what researchers realized was it was actually a cell counter. It was low price, but it really didn't have the functionality of a flow cytometer. And so the key, I think, what we're talking about here is that it's not just that it's an inexpensive system. It was the price-value proposition of a $25,000 box that functioned like a $125,000 BD Excalibur. And to Tim's point, you could do it at a gross margin where because you didn't have any recurring revenue from it, that the gross margin on the box was good enough that you could actually sell a lot of these.
And in 2007, Guava wasn't yet a failure.
It was failing.
It was failing.
Guava was failing
after about $40 million investment.
And had been overinvested in, and was a struggling company.
And Acri had $5 million investment at 2007.
We have a question here.
Yeah, but
For the investors, do you consider other technical market areas that were probably undergoing the same sort of transition? In particular, microplate readers at that time were transitioning from a hideously expensive something to, in 2006, I jumped into essentially state-of-the-art for 1/4 the cost of what they were 2 or 3 years before. Do you look into those kind of markets at the same time to see if this is going to have some play, or is that outside the realm of some sort of evaluation?
If an investor likes your opportunity, there's a chance that it's completely opportunistic. There's also a really good chance that that investor has some sort of thesis that fits the thesis that they're pursuing. So one of the areas, Tim and I both do life sciences, but one of the areas that we found very interesting was distributed technology to the benchtop. We looked at a desktop mass spec system. Same principle. Take really expensive equipment. It's used. It's proven. Right. The value is there. Just get it down in price and function. And so when we spoke with Jen, this was actually hitting something that we already liked, which is the idea of distributed technology.
But I didn't know that. Didn't know they liked that.
Yeah, could BD have lowered their price to match your $25,000?
That's a great question. BD, well, I won't ask them, but at the time, we believed that BD's, the intelligence that we had was that BD's cost for their comparable instrument was something north of $40,000. So for them to sell a $25,000 instrument, which was what I was advocating at the time, we would not really, I mean, that would be a money-losing proposition, even with the fact that they are the biggest reagent player in the market.
But that was always a risk.
Can I make one comment? You see that curve that shows price sensitivity? And this is kind of this is not scientific.
Ask it as a question.
Well, it's yeah, right. It's interesting because, obviously what that implies is that north of 25K, the demand for an Accuray box would drop precipitously if you went north of 25K.
So why do I believe that, Pete?
Why do you believe that, Jen? This is how she was on the board, too. She was with us around.
Unstoppable.
We've flinched.
So we would actually, from talking to investors, have found that there's a little bit of a soft play, but at 50K, there's a lot more approvals that are required for them to get, so we really see the price sensitivity. And our Fortec survey, we tested some different price points, and there was a distinct knee in the price sensitivity curve.
No. 50K. She wasn't willing to go 50K.
She wasn't.
We got a little revisionist history going on here. You were much firmer in believing that 25 was the right number.
I don't think that's true. Can you testify here, please?
I was the anchor. I was holding it down.
Okay, good.
No, 2007.
I made that curve. It was based on.
It's all him. I merely defended.
Based on more qualitative data than quantitative data for that particular curve. And
Yeah.
It turns out you can move higher.
You could, absolutely.
Moving right along.
Moving along. We have some IP to protect all of this. So we have re-engineered the flow cytometer from the ground up, and we have 16 patent applications on fluidics, optics, and electronics to protect this from, BD or somebody else coming in and trying to take over with it. Any questions?
Pete, that was your topic.
Do you have the right to practice?
Well, we have done some preliminary freedom to operate.
Freedom to operate.
Freedom to operate analysis, and it does look like we have very good opportunity in that regard. We do not, the kinds of things that are protecting Becton Dickinson and Beckman Coulter's instruments are around primarily air over water systems. Ours is so different that it doesn't encroach at all.
Yeah, I have a question. This might be off the map a little bit, but on your patent, do you ask the question about where you patent? Is that pretty much understand in the industry? Do you patent U.S. patents, patents in China? Is that a question that you would ask as investors, or is that understood?
When we look at IP, we look at both the ability for the company to actually practice what it's going to do, because just because they're patented doesn't mean that there isn't something in that box that someone else can block them from doing. So we spend actually a lot of time making sure that they are able to put out what they can. And then on top of that, can they protect what they're actually doing? And we look in the U.S. and internationally and, in all those areas.
It's sort of interesting at this stage. A lot of times, general, sophisticated, serious entrepreneur, she'll give the answer that's appropriate at this stage, which is understanding both issues. And usually we'll sort of accept it, maybe do a little bit of work, but then we'll hire, as we get more interested, our own IP expert to do that. How much IP diligence costs got built up on this round?
About $60,000, $70,000.
Yeah, so there was a big kind of push on IP because there was a couple of issues that needed to be sort of vetted pretty carefully.
Yeah.
One piece of advice for young companies, funds are tight. It's tough to do a lot on the IP front, and whatever you do, it's likely going to be patenting your own inventions. What a lot of young companies don't do is they don't do a lot of freedom to operate.
And you
can't afford to, right? But that's a big question.
And
that
the
investors have.
other aspect of, the reason we haven't done a tremendous amount of freedom to operate is because the design's evolving. And freedom to operate is design specific. Until your design is set, you can only do limited freedom to operate, but you need to be aware of what else is out there.
In 2007, it was evolving quickly.
Yeah.
But
like
I will
everyone.
say it's expensive, but there are, we just made another investment in a company that the same IP attorney who did this got involved day one with the entrepreneurs, and man, did he, just like on Accurate, did a beautiful job of informing the technology-oriented founders how to avoid certain things when they were creating their designs. So there's some core IP that looks really clean, and then they avoided other issues relating to others' IP in their design of the product. So it can be done, and there are people that will work. Because there's Jeff Shocks. There's a lot of credit both on Accurate and
But
Tandem.
in 2007, both of you were just looking at U.S. IP.
We had PCTs also.
Yeah, okay.
We had we had to because we did it right at the same time.
So just one more question on IP. This gentleman mentioned China. There are two geographies that are really tough from an IP standpoint: China and South Korea. How do you deal with those, or do you just ignore them as an investor? How do you really get around those issues?
Frankly, it's really secondary to us in the situation where we're focusing on a U.S. market opportunity. It's just something that it's tough to spend a lot of time and effort on.
So again, thinking about it as an investor, and thinking about some of the larger growth markets worldwide, China and India come to mind. You just focus on your margin opportunities in the United States and hope that covers off the rest of the world, or?
I think it was pretty well established that the market was a third U.S., a third Europe, and a third rest of the world. And
Correct.
so, there was plenty of opportunities in those other markets. And if you take the third rest of the world, China's obviously going to be a bigger market, but it wasn't so important that we would have to stop doing due diligence, I guess.
So, yep. Okay. So let's talk just for a moment about the competitive advantages. If you look at where our strengths are relative to our competitors, we are going to be far less expensive, a fraction of the cost, an intuitive, easy-to-use software package, which I'm going to talk more about in just a minute. And then we have actually hardware advantages over our top-notch competitors. We have a broader dynamic range. We have very precise fluidic control and user-configurable optics, so we have strengths that they don't even have. And we have a form factor that allows us to implement a shipping-based instrument. So we don't have to send an engineer who's going to install the product. We instead can ship it via FedEx and have a plug-and-play instrument. And those are the things that we think are going to cause our customers to take the chance on purchasing one of these instruments. So I said I was going to talk about software because one of our big competitive advantages is the fact that we don't require 5 days of training and an expert to actually use these instruments. We've worked with Menlo Innovations, which is our software development partner, and outsourced much of the development of this part. And we've come up with a new and easy-to-use, intuitive user interface, and this makes it faster and easier to analyze the data and actually use the instruments to the point where somebody can take it out of the box and have data within an hour of getting one of our instruments, and that is going to be a big competitive advantage for us. In terms of how we see the marketplace, we actually think there are 5,700 labs in the existing market who are current users of flow cytometry, and we think these are the primary users of our first couple of years of sales. And then we see an expansion market, and these are labs that would be interested in using flow cytometry, and we see that as the ready market, and ultimately we see a further expansion. So our goal is actually to penetrate that existing market and move into the expansion markets. And we actually think that because we have this mainframe to PC dynamic, we actually have the possibility of expanding the number of users of flow cytometry dramatically, and that is what's really going to fuel our sales growth. In terms of how are we going to access those, well, number one, we have a chief commercial officer at the helm who has a great deal of experience in terms of selling both consumable and instrument types of products. And as we look at this, our first and most important thing is to create awareness. Okay, so the first response we get from potential customers is, I don't believe it's even possible for you to have a product with this much capability at that price point. So we need to create awareness that that's even possible. And for example, last month when we were in San Diego at the cancer show, we actually had on our booth the actual price point of this product. And I can't tell you how many times people were walking by and went, whoa, who has the price point there? And that made a huge impact in creating awareness that the product is there. Then we need to validate the performance of the product, because they don't want to buy a crap product. They want to buy a great product. And so we're going to do that through these ways that I've got listed here. And then we need to have great customer satisfaction, so we have good referrals. And when people talk to their friends, this is a very highly networked customer base. And 6 degrees of separation is far too great. 1 degree of separation is more typical, and people are going to be talking to each other. So we think about 90% of our sales in the first 3 years is going to be to these customers that already know that they want a flow cytometer, and then we're going to continue to expand from there. I'm sorry. Whoa. Back up.
This next slide. Could you go to the next slide?
Next slide? Do you want me to tell you what it says?
Are you going to outsource the manufacture of this highly innovative product?
We sure are.
Excuse me, I forgot. I've got another meeting right now.
Darn. So, yes, in fact, last year, over a year, we've been working on this relationship with Delphi Medical, and we actually went through a pretty rigorous process of looking at 6 or 8 different manufacturing partners and selected them, and now we're working on transitioning the technology over to them and figuring out how to get ready for that process. We actually have, we're working on pre-production prototypes and getting them involved in purchasing the components. We don't have any sole source components, and our reagent production is outsourced. This is going to require and keep us capital efficient, Pete, which is something
I think
important.
this is a fantastic idea.
Oh, man, I got to say. So I've been through this, and maybe it's with a company similar to this, or maybe it was this company, that was manufacturing a highly innovative product for one of my other portfolio companies. And I used to have less gray hair before that process started. Because
what went wrong with
my
that process?
instinct here, Jen, is that what's going to happen is that you might as well start renting houses in Colorado or Utah, wherever this facility is, because your entire R&D team is going to move there for about the 9 months that you're trying to get this sorted out. Not maybe because they're not the world's greatest manufacturing engineers, but you're doing some really creative, innovative, obviously, stuff here, and sort of throwing it over the wall might be what it says in the playbook, but I think that integration between R&D and manufacturing is going to be a lot tighter. You just might as well move everybody out there.
Now, on the other hand, this is a company that is outsourced the software development, outsources the manufacturing, and that means that we don't have to spend our capital to create that infrastructure to do that internally. That seems like a really
and look at all these great products they're currently making.
A really capital-efficient model.
I thought, Tim, in 2007, this was a hot button for you, that we would get to those cost of goods percentages by outsourcing our manufacturing and the speed to it.
I don't think Tim ever thought that.
No.
I have to defend him in this.
Oh, okay.
Pete did.
Other VCs did.
You just hate to make the mistake the next year that you just went through the previous year as a venture capitalist, right? So that's actually very true, right? It's like if you invest in a space and somebody comes with a hot product in the same general space, but you just made sort of a quote unquote mistake, it's like it's human nature. So, but to this point, this is a very valid point, I think, which is, the issue is, in the long run, getting the cost of goods to the instrument at some scale down to a reasonable level. But the transition, sort of, here's the blueprint, let me throw it over the wall, and you'll make it, and it'll just kind of come off the line on something that's innovative. I'd had some firsthand experience exactly at this point in time that was a difficult thing to do.
Well, those are really good points. We'll have to think hard about it.
Somebody asked that at the end. Now we're in 2007.
Yeah.
Well, Jen knows this. I mean, if we wouldn't have invested, it would have been over this issue.
Yeah, this was almost a deal breaker for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that. We spent a lot of time on that, but we won't go through that now.
You can bring it up after.
So, in terms of who we have on the team right now, so I'm the CEO of the company, one of the co-founders, and we started this company in 2000. We started working on this company in 2004, formed the company in 2005, and my background is in sales, executive management, finance. I've worked in 3 technology startups, have an MBA from Kellogg, but I am not the engineer. The engineer on this team is Colin Rich. He was my partner in starting it, and he's really the driving force behind inventing all the technologies that make our product so different and so capable relative to BD. We have recruited Jack Ball, who's just recently joined us, moving here from Seattle. And he has a 30-year track record developing sales and marketing teams at life science instruments and tools companies, at top companies. And we have David Olson, who is our Chief Scientific Officer, and he is our voice of the customer. He has a PhD in molecular biology, has a bunch of California-based startup experience, and he's really bringing that side to the table. And then we have Steve Califf, who's keeping track of all the things going on in the back of the house. And we have a couple of board members who have a lot of experience. We have a guy named Walt Young, who has about 37 years of experience in Fortune 500 companies, as well as Tom Kadir, who is a leading professor of marketing and entrepreneurship, as well as a very active angel investor. And that's our core team, and we have a total of 13 people in the company right now. We use about 30 people at Menlo, and we are continuing to develop our team.
So at this point, how important is the team on the investment standpoint of making this decision? You've got a really cool technology, one that started in at the university and was much further developed within the company. But how important is the team at this point, at this stage in the venture? How do you do your diligence on that team?
Whatever opportunity that you consider, the management team is the number one. It's got to be one of the number one considerations. And it's not possible for every young company to have, absolutely a stellar, been there, done that team at an early stage. I think that's tough. So you look at this team, and this is the candid conversations we'd have, and say, okay, well, how many wins has Jen Baird had in her past? Is she a repeat winner? And has she proven she's been there and done that? No. Colin Rich seems like an awfully bright guy. I mean, he is a, brilliant scientist. But has he done this before? No. David Olson, some entrepreneurial experience. But if you look at that team, there wasn't anything about it that said been there, done that. The one thing that I think there were a couple things that were really impressive. One was this team would absolutely break through walls and chew nails to get done what they needed to get done. And I think that passion and commitment came across. And the other is you did have somebody on the team who had been there and done it, and that was Jack. And you always look for these little signs of which executive is voting with their feet to join a team because they believe in it. Jack had actually been in the flow cytometry space before, and so that wasn't the only reason, but to have a talented team with someone there who had been involved in something similar, who had experiences. I will take repeat experience any day of the week over sheer intellectual horsepower because there's just mistakes you avoid. It's I think the one thing you got to realize that in a small company, the margin for error can actually be quite thin because the capital is lean and you can't afford to do things in a serial process and waste capital. And so anything you can do to avoid going down rabbit holes, that's a help. That's actually what investors and board directors are supposed to do, and that's what experienced management does as well. And you can't help but make mistakes, right? We make mistakes here, right?
Yeah, I'd concur right down the line with that. I mean, I think convincing Jack to move in a pre-commercial company, was a pretty big marker. And you saw the talent of the team was obvious, and its inexperience was sort of in this game was sort of obvious. And to reemphasize Pete's point about Jen and the team's ability to sort of raise at this point $5 million in angel money, this is not an easy story to tell angel investors, to get government grants, to move this thing forward by just sort of sheer will and make a lot of progress. It was a pretty big marker as well. I mean, it said a lot how far they had taken this company on fairly lean resources, and that they just weren't going to sort of give up. So that was fairly important as well. There are a lot of times there's management assessment tools and things that you can use to sort of fill it out, but it is a picture you paint yourself and make a qualitative judgment at the end of the day.
So let's talk about financials. So we think we're going to launch this product in the third quarter of this year and get about $1 million in revenue, get probably 31 instruments sold. Actually, 39 instruments sold if you count the OEM opportunity. Remember, we talked earlier about actually having a number of conversations going on with potential partners who want to sell this instrument on their platform, so we'll be able to leverage not only our sales force but their sales force, and we are going to use direct sales in the initial part. And then we think we're going to have a very rapid growth curve, as you can see. And ultimately, we think we're going to be able to get gross margins that are up in the 60% range, and I think that can be looked at as very attractive when you're concerned about margins on reagents. Expect to have profitability in the third year.
You think this instrument is ready to launch?
Absolutely, Pete.
It works, right? I mean, this thing works as advertised?
It really does work, but this is February, and in January we did run into a couple of hiccups.
Oh, really?
Oh, we did. And we are working very actively on those hiccups right now. Okay. So we actually found that the low-end resolution wasn't quite as good as we wanted it to be to do bead-based assays, and so we're going to try and make some improvements to that, which is why we've moved our launch date out into the third quarter from the first quarter.
What do you think of these financials, Pete?
I always find I am investing right before the hockey stick.
That's a good place to invest,
I'm always there. Yeah, it's aggressive. They're aggressive. And the gross margin is a little bit low, but you look very capital efficient, right? I mean, you're really not burning much capital.
No, we're only asking you for $5 million right now.
To go from $1 to $7.5 million of revenue in the course of a year would put you in the Hall of Fame.
True.
If you're only seeking $5 million, Pete, why did you need another investor? Isn't that a check that you can write as a lead along with the existing investors following on? Why did you feel like you needed a co-lead in Arboretum or someone else?
I think anytime you're looking at a company that has high operating risk, you want to balance that with lowering the financial risk. And it's a balancing act, and that's the nature of syndicating investments between investors. And it's not just the capital. It's the expertise that you get around the board table with angel investors and independent directors who bring pattern recognition experience. And it's how co-investors work together. And in this case, first of all, Arboretum is a fantastic life sciences fund, and they're deep in domain expertise. And second of all, they're local. How great would it be to have, I'm in Chicago, really would be helpful to have somebody who knows these people and is on the ground and brings those local contacts and resources to the company. That's a great combination.
The VCs like to spread their risk. Not only the local, they like to have at least two aboard. It's my experience as an angel. It's rare that you'll have a VC by himself. They always come in twos, sort of like Noah's Ark or women going to the bathroom or something.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I missed that.
I think go with me to the restroom.
But yeah, real brief. There was a little interesting dynamic here. There was another fund, who I won't name, I guess, bigger fund from the West Coast that had been doing the diligence with you guys for a while. East Coast, sorry, yeah. They were kind of getting cold feet over a few things. Well, this issue 2 in particular that Pete was just getting into, and so some of the dynamics of the syndicate and our commitment to the syndicate and how that might all work were an interesting little couple of week dance that worked out well.
I think I had pneumonia about that time. Well, let me tell you what we're looking for. So we've raised $7 million to date, $5 million from angels over the course of the last few years, as well as we just got about 6 months ago a $2 million award from the 21st Century Jobs Fund, and we're looking for $5 million to take us through commercialization of our first product. And we think that right along the time where we get to profitability, approximately, we'll have some great opportunities for exit. And we think the most likely exit in our case will be a reagent player who wants to actually leverage our platform for their reagent sales. And so we've actually got active conversations going on for reagent partnerships with all the people on this list. And we are pretty excited about the ultimate potential of the company. So, just to summarize, we've got eager customers in an underserved market. We have a flow cytometer, which we believe will be the next ubiquitous cell analysis tool. We have patents protected worldwide for our competitive advantage. We have a virtual product development structure, which is very capital efficient. We have contract manufacturing that's lined up, a cost-effective sales model. We're about to launch our first product, and recurring revenue streams that will come online eventually, and a platform technology that we will be able to leverage in OEM and reagent partnerships. Any other questions?
I have a comment. You got through that in 57 minutes. Yeah. And the amount of interruption that came from the audience is probably about what you would have gotten from the audience that you were talking to.
Yeah, I
so
agree.
For those who have not been through this before, the getting stopped 5 different times on your first slide.
Totally normal.
Yeah, totally normal.
And this was what, virtually half the presentation you had in 2007.
Yeah, I cut this presentation
In
in
half.
half to get it down to a level that
hold
we
on,
could do
before
this.
while we're still in 2007, Jen.
Yeah.
What was the B round? that you
5
were-
million.
5
Yeah, 5 million. That was the B round.
and what was the result? Who came in what?
The Angels came in for $1 million, and we had $2 million from Baird Venture Partners and $2 million from Arboretum.
And here, I'll start with the Angels. We had already put in $5 million, right, or something close.
Yeah, $5 million.
And that $1 million on the B round, I lost most of the first Angels because it was a down round.
Yep, 40% down round.
And I was called all sorts of names, lower,
Me
even.
too.
And so was Jen, by probably about 40 or 50 Angels that did the $5 million. But I also use that as an example in some of my recent lectures. Some of you have seen the advantages of a down round for an Angel. If you're
If you've got the guts to play.
because I picked up most of that down round, or from close friends of mine did, to do that $1 million. But I was on both sides. I was an investor, as I'm here, but I was on the other side representing the other investors. So it was ugly. That spring of 2007 for me was personally very ugly.
Can I ask 2 questions? So I'm a scientist by training, not a finance guy. So by down round, what exactly do you mean by that? And then I have a follow-up question
that the
about
valuation was reduced from what the prior investment was. In the end, it hardly made any difference.
Right,
It
that
was
valuation
40%
by
less.
external.
Well, these guys
Yeah.
would make a price, right?
So
they're going to
So
give
they
a
were
bid.
buying it basically cheaper, their percentage share, cheaper than what the last round of Angels had done, to oversimplify.
Yep.
But it's a very emotional part for Angels. Any down round, VCs, Angels, any down round is emotional. But for Angels, particularly the 40 or 50 we had in, those 40 or 50, 200, I can't repeat the words that they called me. Okay?
Right.
So yeah, it's just a private market, right? So these guys submitted a term sheet. We signed up to join up at a price per share that was lower than the previous one, and ego and all sorts of things enter into it at some point. These guys are being unfair. The response is just sort of, well, if that's the case, go find sort of another investor, right?
And some of my investors had alternatives, which I had to, as a board member, I had so many hats in 2007. Investor, defender of past investors, and a board member deciding not only which VC to vote for, but if. So it was it was charming, but I voted as a director to bring VCs in and these two, because I thought the longer term value that they added, not just their cash, was a lot better than going with a rinky-dink Angel bridge round, which would be very temporary and very short-lived.
So, the question about the exit strategy. So, my experience is mostly in pharmaceutical development and companies that are trying to take drugs to a point where you can attract, say, a larger player to bring them in, and it's a pretty complicated situation now with the way markets are going. But in the case of a device like this, the strategy of maybe partnering with a reagent company, because I know from my experience that big companies like BD will give Core Labs an instrument, just put it on the shelf for service contracts. At least that was the case.
Not in the research market, because they couldn't afford to do that.
Right, but
that was true in the clinical market.
Yeah, okay,
absolutely.
so that's it's coming straight. So was that something that you had thought about like right up front, or was it getting to the point where, okay, we need to have some options for exit strategy or for leveraging, say, reagent, the reagent market that's peculiar for our platform or something like that?
We had done the numbers repeatedly and figured out that our reagent sales would never amount to hardly anything on that revenue ramp. The only way we were going to get that revenue ramp was by instrument sales, because the reagent sales take a lot longer time to develop, and it's totally dependent on how much of an installed base you have. And we were going to have to, we ended up in our first year of sales actually selling 100 instruments. The second year was about 300. And so we actually got that. But the reagent revenue, despite Pete's perception of the value of it, because it's great, but it's only great farther out. And we weren't going to get there to see that value because we never thought we were going to get past 2011 before being purchased. So we couldn't get enough reagent revenue. So it was one of these discussions that we would have with investors who would say, razor blade, you got to have the razor. And we would argue for the perspective of disposable equipment. And frankly, these guys, Pete was the first person who bought that story because Pete was the first VC who was willing to come in, and we ultimately had more VCs that entered the game. But that was a big leap because he was absolutely on the side of we need a razor. And you run into that when you're talking about whatever your story is, there's going to be some aspect to it that people don't like. And so reagent partnerships and OEM partnerships were a big part of mitigating the investor fear around that. We did less of it than I talked about in this pitch.
A part of it was we knew that we thought that the exit multiple would be capped at some realm given the nature of the product and this particular issue. And so if you could keep the capital into the company, in the sub 30 or 25 million range, I think 30 or 31 was it? I don't think we had drawn the last piece. So 31 I think had gone in. Which was a little more than we had projected, but not outside the realm of what we thought was reasonable. The management team might have thought it was going to be a lot less, but the math would work. It's not razor blade is sort of shorthand for companies like that get more of an exit multiple, right? So, but if you can construct an economic model that works, you should invest. We never had huge heartburn because it wasn't razor blade. We just all looked at the fundamental exit price and what we thought the capital would go in.
Jen, you better watch the time here. I think we got a little bit. But 2007, we had $7 million in, raised another $5 million, so we had $12 million in 2007. In the end, is the chart we are up to $38 million?
Well,
30.
This is 30 million, and there's one more Series E that's not on the chart, which was 3.
Right.
Is that right? 4
in 2010. So yeah, 31 million.
But this is retrospective in the sense that that's actually what happened in terms of milestones. We did get to break even in 2010. We did launch in Europe and have a second product in 2009. We launched in 2008, which you'll notice was probably 4 or 5 months after I said in this pitch, which was probably 6. So it was probably a year delayed from when you and I first started talking.
Yeah. But in 2007, Jen, it was a scary time. We were bringing VCs. The beta had just taken a crap. The angels just disappeared.
It is a scientific term.
These are technical terms. The board meetings were ugly. But, we had a couple of VCs, including these two, and we were very lucky that we pulled it all off at this valuation. It was a win-win. They were happy.
That's not how it felt at the time.
No, at the time. Okay, now in the last 5 years, Pete and Tim should talk. In looking at this presentation in hindsight, 5 years past, what were the biggest? The financials were total hockey sticks. Pete was right. We didn't come close to those.
Yes, we did, Walt.
A year later,
we came
Pete was
very
always
close.
right.
We did.
Really, the break-even was 2010.
It was amazing. I was struck.
Yeah, it was real close, but it was about a year late. Tim was right on manufacturing. To do contract manufacturing when we were still prototyping and developing was a total disaster. So we brought it in-house.
Did a complete
Otherwise,
180
it would
degree
have
about
never
face
worked.
on that one.
On her own.
Made her.
So Tim and Pete were proper in their points. In hindsight, they can say, "Wifey, they were told you so." Tim told us so on manufacturing. Pete told us so
On price.
on price
Yeah.
and on the disease. What else in hindsight would you two say?
It's very tempting for a young company to want to commercialize and generate revenue. That's always very tempting.
Don't know why. That
Right?
would be tempting.
And the reality is that as soon as you go commercial, you cross a point of no return. And if your system doesn't work or you've got problems with it, it's kind of like trying to rebuild your engine mid-flight. It's very difficult. So I think the reality of this is that there were a number of things that we did right. There were a number of decisions by everybody who I think contributed correct decisions. It was Jen's decision to bring commercialization or manufacturing in-house because of the asymmetry of risk. That if Delphi got it wrong, that we would lose. And Tim, that was Tim's position, and I think influenced Jen. But
Wore them all down.
really, it was very right, and he had experience with that manufacturer. So I think the one thing that we did was Jen wanted to generate revenue. The team wanted to generate revenue very badly, and so the conditions of our term sheet were that you don't generate revenue.
It was tough.
You need to actually take this capital and you need to beta test it so that when we launch, we know everything about the box and it's not being left to chance that there's a problem with it. And in fact, the $5 million of capital we raised was all for beta testing.
That's true. And we did
Right.
25 beta tests.
And we worked out every kink to the point where when we launched in 2008, we had a more robust
In
instrument.
2007, a lot of the board meetings were me and the management advocating for going to market and Pete saying no. I mean, that was really the dynamic
Yeah.
a lot because we thought we were ready and he kept saying no. And Jack and I kept saying, there's never been a product as beta tested as this one. Right, Jack?
Yeah, but we were all ready to go in January, and it took a crap.
We just put you in the
You
we
know,
put you in the hot.
Tom Kinnear and I looked at each other at the board meeting and said, "Oh, we're screwed." Okay.
So it worked. I think it's been public. The number's been public. The acquisition by BD for $205 million in
Right.
March of 2011.
yes.
And I mean, I think it is a pretty good example of all of us contributing a little bit. And the management team had the right combination of stubbornness and persistence. But I think we worked through those issues. And to your guys' credit at Baird and Pete's, that turned out to be a great move because when we hit the market, man, we had a few ramp up in manufacturing issues, but that wasn't terribly unexpected. But it worked, and the customers really liked it.
We did like it.
A
And
lot.
this chart just shows in 2007, there's no little green dots because we didn't ship any instruments. In 2008, we had 103 shipped by the end of the year. In 2009, we were up another 300, so about 400, and 2010 kept going. But that gives you a sense of, and we did actually hit approximately the revenue ramp that you see. If you actually shifted it, according to what we projected over the years, we were pretty close on the revenue.
Yeah.
If you ship, you have to ship
Yeah.
it out part of a year, and
Yeah.
but really, our first year, not from that ramp
Yeah,
because
it was a year.
that chart that I showed you had us launching and in the third quarter of 2007, and we actually launched in the first quarter of 2008. So you only have to shift it a little bit, and we had a $3 million revenues, then $12 million revenue, and then over 20 in the first 3 years. And if you run the numbers, it's surprisingly close. I don't know if we
Yeah.
could have gotten to 150 million, but we certainly we're closer than I
No.
would think in back then.
Let me interrupt here. Pete said, somebody asked him what you looked at in an investment, and you said the people in the management team, and you mentioned some of the things. Here, I was involved in this company over the 6 years, 2004 to 2011, and it was all people, okay? And Pete said it here a bit. We all were involved, and in the last 9 months, everyone's claimed credit for the Accuray success. But it really comes down to a 6 or 7 individuals, and Jen leads the group, okay? Jen, Jeff Williams, Jack Ball, Dave Olson. I mean, those 4.
Colin.
And,
Don't
I'm
forget
sorry,
Colin.
and the most important
Don't
is
forget
Colin.
The guy who
Colin
Colin.
Rich. He is number 1 before Jen or anyone else.
Yeah.
Without Colin, this wouldn't have existed. And so those 5 or 6 people are really what made it happen over 6 years, okay? So all the rest of us take credit as investors or advisors, and everyone that's touched Accuray has turned to gold into a PR firm. But it's really those 6 individuals that made it fly.
Yeah, and I disagree. We're the kind of capital enablers. We're the coaches and try to offer some advice based on some scars. But it is the teams that make it all happen.
My question is getting kind of old now, but I was worried about these fallen angels. There's people that bet on the company early on. When they didn't want to get in that down round, did they lose their investment, or did they just come out?
I am their best friend now.
Oh, okay. They don't hate you anymore.
After 4 years of not getting Christmas cards, all of a sudden, yeah, I get their Christmas cards.
They got.
They're very fickle. They're very fickle folks.
But they got diluted. So if they didn't go into the Series B, they got diluted.
But they still had.
Oh no,
they still had
got
their shares.
They
didn't
still
lose
got
their
a 5-time return, which is amazing due to everyone's efforts.
Yeah, just to be clear, it wasn't us. Well, we were always looking for a good, fair price, but it was the issues relating to the beta testing that created the need for a delay in the launch of the company, and then it was the beta testing.
Right,
It was
but
the
that was our
beta
problem.
results that created the delay in the launch, which created the need to sort of reprice the value of the company at that time.
We're getting close on time. Let's take one more question, then we'll try and wrap up.
Yeah, I just had a question regarding the, I guess it would be Series D funding, Fidelity and Flagship.
That was C.
Or C?
Yeah.
That was a big jump, and I'm curious the decision process or locating and bringing them in and getting them on board with Baird and Arboretum. Did you two have a critical part to play in locating them and bringing them on board?
Yeah, we all did. When new investors come on board, I think the key is those investors and the management team agree to the milestones that you think is going to build value in the company. So when we invested collectively our $5 million in the Series B round, the idea was prove the box is ready for commercial launch. And we felt that if we did that there would be other investors who then would be at the right stage that they would find that appealing. And so when you look at the venture market, think of funds that are on a continuum in a food cycle. And as long as you hit certain milestones, you can approach certain investors. And what Jen and the team did was they achieved the milestone in 2007 that enabled them to go to larger firms who were looking for something a bit more advanced. And the directors and the board make those introductions to those investors. Back to the point we made about, Jen was knocking on doors, but we were helping her.
Where were you in the Series C?
Was I in the Series C? Mm-hmm. I sure was in the Series C.
Okay, so just to clarify, those were the leads, not all the investors. So all of these guys were in the Series C. Actually, you guys were in all the rounds.
We were in the B and the C and the D.
So we kept reinvesting, but you find new investors because you need more capital, and then they help you price a fair price. Right. So.
Yeah. We invested in every round.
Yeah.
It's best to align everybody if you can keep them in. The psychological mesh, too, of bringing in new VCs, because you got to have a teamwork and alignment on the board, not just money.
That was pretty typical. We did a lot of introductions. Jen did a lot of presentations. We had 2 serious term sheets that were about the same in price, so we went with the group that we thought had the most expertise to offer. But I think you were sort of the introductions on Flagship and Fidelity, and I was more the introduction on the other group. But that's one thing actually we do add a fair amount of value when you get us in, is that we can kind of help.
It's actually a huge value, because when you go in with one of these guys making the introduction, now the story isn't, here I am, please talk to me. It's, here, meet my portfolio company. Hi, I'm the portfolio company, and I'm already vetted partially by the fact that they've already invested. And that makes a massive difference in fundraising. And in the Series D, it was still stronger because things were really rolling at that point, and there was a little bit of a battle of who got to invest from the outside in Series D. So, and I suspect Series E was not any easier.
Yeah, and Tim, just one quick point, too. When you go back to look at the Series B, when we originally struck the deal terms for the Series B, we had terms on the table. That's when the technical glitch happened, and that's when we revalued the deal terms.
That was
tough for everybody. it's not uncommon that angel investors will overpay. And for every entrepreneur in the room, the first step in funding is oftentimes friends, family, angel investors, and you're going to people who mean a lot to you, and you're asking them to invest, and they invest in some price. And it's very hard in an illiquid, imperfect market for angel investors to do the analysis to say this is what it should be worth. So the situation we had was we were pricing this at a level we thought was rational. It was very painful. But in the end, that was really justified, because when you look at what happened was we put our capital into the B round, we made progress, and we got a marginal step up for that next round, which suggests that the way that we priced the B round was in fact appropriate for the progress the company made when that big C round came in, even though doing that up front was very difficult.
Yep.
We got one more quick question.
Maybe it's because the nature of our meeting here, you kind of role-playing, but it seems like there was some apprehension, as I'm sure there are with any kind of investment you have, but you still wrote the check. And I'm just curious about what about other than Jen Smile and your warm relationship that made you go ahead and go ahead and write the check. And we're talking about presentations. If I'm giving a presentation, what tick point should I have to make my investors write that check too? So I'm looking at those.
Yeah. If we didn't have apprehension on an issue, we hadn't studied it hard enough. So we always have apprehension. And I mean, this was a great, investment for all of us up here, and we had apprehension because you heard these. It was role playing, but these are the real questions that Guy'd ask, and I would have kind of physically recoiled at the outsourced manufacturing strategy. Probably.
I think you did.
So why? Because we're making some risk, adjusted calculation that can be done a little bit on a spreadsheet, but a little bit in our heads and our hearts in assessing some of those qualitative things. I will say that this presentation, I don't know if this is videoed or whatnot, boy, you wanted a sample of, and I got to say, you've stripped it down some, and Jen was probably maybe the most prepared CEO almost of anybody who's ever pitched us in terms of backup and instantly providing information, supported her theses. I mean, she had it down. If we all had a quibble, I think it was sometimes your slides would be overly complicated and just too busy because she was trying to get across almost too much. Now, I mean, so it was always good.
Those slides I did not change though.
This is a really good presentation in terms of hitting on all the relevant points. She hit on IP, she hit on manufacturing, she hit on the team, she hit on the market, she hit on the value proposition. So there are 8 to 10 things that you want to cover in about the number of slides she covered. So if you're thinking about putting together a presentation, it's a pretty good sample.
I think it's, aside from the fact that you have to have a good idea and a good opportunity and an attractive technology, take all that aside, for any entrepreneur, I think it's very hard to be someone who believes that something can be done that's never been done before, has that optimism, is determined to stick with that, but yet is balanced enough to take input from outsiders and improve the plan and improve the model. And I think what you don't see here is the company had a good plan. There was risk. There were things that were not knowable. It was a good opportunity to take the risk on. What you don't see is the countless people that Jen and the team actually pitched to, the amount of effort that went into actually raising capital and dealing with people who are getting on the cell phone and talking to their tennis partner because they're rude. And the reality is that there are rude VCs, and there are people who are disconnected, and there are people who think they know the business better than you do. And the amount of determination to stick with the plan and just the amount of diligence we got from Jen and the team was unbelievable because they had been asked every question, and they had information to answer it. And the cynical part is, at some point, you've answered so many questions, there's nothing anyone can ask you that you cannot answer with a really reasoned argument. And so, but I think keeping that energy level and being determined and going through that is just is very tough. But I think those are the hardworking companies that get funded because that's the bar to raise capital. And I think Jen and the team showed that in spades. And as a VC, we're putting our capital in, and you want to know the people who you're backing are fully vested, that they are 110% vested, and they're taking risk with you. it's our capital, it's their time, sometimes it's their capital. And this team proved to us that they just weren't going to take no for an answer in making the technology work. And and there were things about it that we got lucky.
Great. I hope that this was informative. I hope everybody got a chance to see what it's like to pitch to a VC. I'd like to thank our investors and our CEO. And I hope that we'll see all of you the second Wednesday in January when we've got a topic, harnessing information technology to create breakthroughs in healthcare. So we'll see you at that time. Thank you.